Hi there, J.R. Lewis with you, and it is the 5 p.m. hour now on Friday, April the 3rd. The mayor's latest press briefing over the city's YouTube channel has been done, and we are introducing this week a new companion program that is intended to be a regular weekly after feature from those press briefings where we get to meet with key members of the city's incident management team and take some of the questions that you've been sending in to cordovaprepared at yahoo.com. Get some of those answered by the people who are in charge of managing these things. So this will continue to evolve, and we encourage you to continue sending your questions to that address, and they might end up being featured on the program, in addition to the individual answers you get in reply to your emails. Obviously, answers on the radio are not the only answers you'll get to those questions. The team will write you back with the best available answer at the time, given that this, of course, is a very fluid situation. But we will pull from that, we will glean questions from that, the ones that seem to be of the most concern to folks, and use them on this program, which will be Fridays at 5 p.m. after the mayor's briefing, which happens there at City Hall and is streamed on the YouTube channel. And if you miss this or want somebody to be able to hear it that's not in town, it's also going to go on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/CordovaTV. The guests are Mayor of Cordova, Clay Copeland, obviously, Emergency Management Coordinator Heather Brannon, and the medical advisor to the Incident Management Team, Dr. Hannah Sanders. And we're going to answer about 8 of your questions that were sent in. That program is next here on KLAM. Our program here this afternoon, features Mayor Clay Copeland, the Emergency Management Coordinator Heather Brannon, and the medical advisor to the Incident Management Team, Dr. Hannah Sanders. Very nice to have you all. For the sake of time, we'll forego small talk and just jump right into one of these frequently asked questions. And Mayor Copeland, let's start with you. There's been a lot of interest in sort of the enforcement part of these things, and you guys were sent the question that reads like this. For Alaska Health Mandate 10, requiring 14-day self-quarantine for all entering from out of state, are there forms for passengers to fill out at our airport, and who is enforcing the quarantine? Is it local or state police?
Okay, that's a good question, Jared. I'm going to be pretty transparent here. I think it's important for the community to get straight answers. So there is Alaska Department of Health and Social Services has implemented a travel declaration form. So anybody traveling through Anchorage, Fairbanks, or Juneau Airport has to fill out a fairly robust traveler form for a couple of reasons. One, to identify potential threats, but also for tracking. Should they become symptomatic later, it helps the state manage a potential outbreak. I will say that I am concerned about Flight 61, for example, that's on the ground in Juneau, but passengers don't get off. And I've asked the State Emergency Operations Center, how are those being handled, and can we get copies of those at the community? And then I would say beyond that, the city is implementing its own entry processes so that we have some local controls as well. So we understand and recognize the concern and are working with the state, but we're also being proactive on our side.
Okay. And moving to Dr. Sanders now, another question, and again, all of these questions were sent in to the incident management team using that cordovaprepared at yahoo.com address. Dr. Sanders, if a person has all the COVID-19 symptoms and is having severe difficulty breathing, what happens at that point?
Well, first, I'd like to say we want to know that you're having a hard time and having these symptoms before you're having severe difficulty breathing. So if people start feeling like their breathing is more labored, we want them to call the hospital and come into the emergency room, or call the clinic and go in for a clinic evaluation if they don't feel they need emergency level care. But we want to see people frequently and check in and manage these symptoms before they get to the point that they're having a hard time. That being said, if somebody has severe difficulty breathing, we want them to come to the emergency room, call and let us know when you're on your way so we can make sure that the staff all put on the appropriate protective gear. And when they get to the emergency room, we will assess them and take care of them. A lot of this assessment will be labs, x-ray, maybe CT scans, and a very important part of treating this illness is providing supplemental oxygen. We have these things and we're ready to take care of people.
Okay, and then if somebody needs to be medevacked, when does that call get made and who does it?
So anytime that we have a medevac in Cordova, and it won't change with the current pandemic, the physician will assess our ability to safely care for the patient in Cordova. If we're unable to do that, we'll arrange a medevac. When we're choosing how we medevac a patient, we always go with patient's preference, insurance preferences, and more importantly, bed availability. So we take all those things into account and then place patients as best we can in the most rapid and safe way that we can. Okay,
and then who does the medevac service?
Alaska has, I think right now, 3 commercial services that we call, depending on, again, the patient. If they have Medevac insurance, we usually choose that group first. Depending on the ability or how rapid a service can get to us, sometimes that helps guide the decision. And then we always have the fallback of asking for other help if the commercial entities aren't available, such as asking Coast Guard to help us.
Okay, but there's always a doctor in the ER, and all the physicians are ER trained and have managed ICU people already, right? So there's a lot of expertise on the ground right here in town.
Absolutely. All of our doctors have a lot of experience managing critically ill patients. Our doctors absolutely have the capability. I know there's been a lot of question about ventilator availability. Our doctors could manage a ventilator if we had one. We do not have a ventilator right now. I know that's a big question for the community. The message that I want the community to hear about the ventilator is this is our absolutely final line of defense against this illness. Unfortunately, what we're seeing in the country is people that are getting put on ventilators are very often not surviving this illness. Our hope is that we maintain very strict social isolation and social distancing parameters so people don't get sick, and we don't have to get to that very last final line of defense for this illness.
Okay, so our local medical personnel, another part of this question too, and we'll wrap up this series on that. It's what is the range of time it would take to get to a ventilator, and how does a person keep breathing until then?
So one important thing to remember about COVID-19 is a lot of people do okay with this sickness. Just because you come down with it, it doesn't mean that you are going to need to be put on a ventilator. In fact, about 80% of people won't even need oxygen. So we have the luxury, maybe not luxury, probably the wrong word, but we have the benefit in Alaska of seeing this play out in numerous other places. At the hospital, we're putting together protocols and figuring out how we can triage and see who is going to need that extra support based on their lab and physical exam when we see them. Once we identify the people that are going to need that increased support, we still have time. Very often it's still many days before people progress to that next step in illness.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. Clay, let's get back to you on one of the very common questions in the community about fishermen coming back in. What can you do and what can't you do when you're part of a critical industry, and yet there are community expectations? The question that was sent in to your email address, can someone work on their boat while on self-isolation or self-quarantine?
Okay, yeah, there's a whole variety of the ways that this question is being asked and different nuances and elements of it. And the city mandate requires that everyone arriving commercially by air travel has to self-isolate for 14 days. and you can't enter public places, and you have to keep a 6-foot distance from everyone, including those in your own household, unless your whole household is also prepared to quarantine. It does allow you, when you are in isolation or self-quarantine, to participate in outdoor recreation, driving your vehicle for essential errands, essential, I emphasize, activities on your own property or your own boat or in the open air, as long as you're not entering public spaces or avoiding others and keeping at least a 6-foot distance from others. That being said, this virus can shed to objects. So someone's helping a self-isolation or self-quarantine work on their boat, if someone's helping them, even if they're 6 feet away, they have to be cognizant of surfaces and potential contaminated surfaces. So one individual, yes, you can work on your boat, but just be cognizant that you may be infected, asymptomatic, and you need to be cognizant of, we all need to be cognizant of potentially infected surfaces. So, sanitation, gloves, and so forth. It's incumbent not only on the fishermen, but any support services they might bring onto their boat to work. So the short answer is yes, but with an abundance of caution and following good protocols. And I would just add that some fishermen are like, hey, I come to Cordova and fish every year, but I don't have some of the things on my boat, and are the restrooms going to be open? I don't have a refrigerator. I'm used to shopping every day. And I would just plant the expectation to everybody in our community and everybody coming to our community that the best management is individual behavior. The best protection for you personally and for those around you and you care for is for you to manage your behavior and to take precautions, and don't assume that those services are going to be available or that this is going to be business as usual. So arrive to Cordova if you do decide to come here for the year, and that's a decision everybody should make. Do you really want to come fishing here this year? And weigh that and understand what you're entering, because you should come already prepared. You should have that new refrigerator on your boat. You should plan to have a lot of canned food and bring it with you, or other mitigative measures, have contingencies. You may want to spend your whole season anchored up in your favorite anchorage and dealing only with tenders and not even come in or close to town. So that's just kind of a broad sweep that answers several of those questions. But this is not going to be business as usual in Cordova, or for that matter, anywhere else in the country.
Okay, thanks very much, Clay. And I know as we're having this visit that you have another meeting to get to. Dr. Sanders, you also have a deadline here. So let's explore, if we could, the testing situation. There was a question submitted, approximately how many tests are available in Cordova, and I want to know how many people can be tested with the supplies that we already have. So what are the numbers there?
So Cordova is at the hospital, and at the Alonca Clinic, we continue to follow CDC guidelines in terms of testing and who we test. We continue to test every single person that is falling into those testing guidelines. We have the ability to increase the number of kits that we have, and we can increase those pretty rapidly. I think our turnaround getting them from the labs we can get them within a day or two. So it's a fluid number, and we have a lot of supplies. Heather, do you have a number on that?
In the last news release, it said the capacity to test 300 people at this time, and that additional testing supplies had been ordered, which, of course, doesn't come as a surprise. I know you guys are always trying to make sure we've got those. So 300 sounds like the number at this point.
Yeah, and that's a fluid number. Every day it's going to change depending on how many tests we've done, how many new kits we get in. But we have what I feel is a very adequate supply.
Okay, and then last question for you, Doctor. What happens if someone tests positive for COVID-19 in Cordova?
Well, so what happens from an illness perspective, let's start with what we expect people to do. We want people to quarantine themselves and social distance. Sometimes people might test positive and have household contact. So our goal is to find a way to minimize, even within those households, exposure. We would have the patient stay in a separate room, hopefully with the door closed, have the household members practice excellent hand hygiene, wear masks when they're in the same room as the person that tests positive. From a healthcare, what's going to happen is the patient's illness progresses. Now, most of these patients will have a very mild illness and will only need to check in with their healthcare provider a couple of times, maybe even only the time that we get the testing done. For others, if they're having any difficulty or any increase in symptoms, we want them to check in with their regular doctors or come to the emergency room if they need help.
Okay, thank you, Doctor, very much. And again, your very busy schedule is calling you off to the next thing in a row, so we appreciate your participation.
JR, this is Clay. I wanted to follow up on the testing question just a little bit from the city side. If someone does test positive, the city is very likely going to put more strict protocols in place, and of course communicate that widely to the community so everyone knows that hopefully there wouldn't be any lack of diligence at that point, but certainly underscore the importance of increased and continued diligence in self-isolation, social distancing, so forth. But we talked a little bit earlier about a special council meeting going to here in a couple minutes. And one of the things the city council will be considering for Cordova's part is looking at the potential for additional testing resources. Now, there's a lot of tests out there. No one test answers all the questions about whether you have it or have had it or are now past it, but there's different tests that can tell you different things, and one of the things we're considering is an antibody test. Now, the city council is going to decide whether or not to move forward on the city's behalf, but we have several options there, and we may exercise some or none of those options, but it's just another element, another tool at our disposal, and the bigger communication to the community is that we're very busy. We have a well-trained team. City Council and the Incident Management Team recognize that we need to communicate more through venues like these, but we can't share every single nuance and every single development as it happens in real time. And we encourage the patients of the community and recognize that, using the Cordova Prepared is a good portal and trying to allow that flow of information. For instance, calling and threatening a councilman to post things on Facebook or facing an incident management team member while they potentially are waiting from a call from the governor's office or in a call that they've put on hold to talk to you. We just need to be respectful and work together. And I know this communication will be helpful, and we strongly encourage the community to keep asking questions and offering suggestions. But if we can use the established channels to do that, it actually improves our effectiveness. For my part, there's nothing in the community can say to me that will heighten my concern or vigilance in trying to find solutions and protect the community. And I also have parents that are still alive and that are at risk, and so does the rest of the team. We're all in this together, and we're doing great, and we appreciate your help in communicating some of the things we're accomplishing, some of the questions that we still have, and things we're doing to mitigate those. So thank you very much.
All right, Clay, great. Thank you. And we'll look forward to our continued visits as the time allows. Now, Heather Brannon, the emergency management coordinator and potentially one of the hardest working people, short of doctors and nurses these days, I'd like to go back to the fishing fleet because a lot of the chatter, as you know very well, a lot of the questions have to do with the returning fishermen and a number of fishermen, obviously, who want to do things right when and if they come back. So a question that you received reads like this. It's my understanding that upon arrival in Cordova, self-quarantining for 2 weeks is mandatory. I'm a gill netter who will be coming over from another town before the season starts and have no residence in Cordova. I can stay on my boat, but without things like a refrigerator, bathroom, electricity, etc., isolating for 2 weeks without leaving the boat would be logistically quite difficult for me. Will there be a plan in place for those of us who are in situations like this? What is the team's response to that?
So to answer this question, you're going to be responsible for making your own quarantine accommodations and providing the city with your plan to self-quarantine as a small boat owner and operator. The city can't anticipate and mitigate each fisherman's resources or logistics, so we're asking at this time that you look at what you're going to need to quarantine and put those systems in place for yourself. Currently, the city of Cordova has developed a fisheries task force, and part of the reasoning behind this task force is to put together information to fishermen that while they're quarantining, it's going to be instructions on how you can reach out to get groceries, to get supplies, what different businesses are doing to kind of help support this situation as you're waiting it out on your vessel. We do expect you to be calling in to get your groceries and your supplies through the stores, and the stores have currently set up processes to help you do that. In addition, the Harbor Master bathroom will remain open, and this is to accommodate folks who don't have a shower situation on your vessel. This is not the number one recommended course of action, and we ask that you use this option with an abundance of caution. If you are able to get a hold of someone local where they will allow you to use their bathroom to shower, or if you're able to shower on your vessel, that is recommended. And that is sort of what the city has set up at this point. As we move into the season, I'm sure that more options will open up and things will change. But for now, that is currently what we have in place.
Okay, yeah, and you raise a good point that this is such a fluid situation. But at this point, it sounds like what you're cautioning against is that people show up saying, hey, I'm a fisherman, here I am, show me everything you've set up for me. The responsibility is really on the part of the person trying to come into town, correct?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. The expectation is that if you want to come in for the season and, partake in the industry, we're expecting that you are going to have a well thought out plan in advance of arriving in Cordova. And we will help support in the ways that we can, but we do need everyone to take those proactive measures before arriving. Yeah,
you can't expect it all to have been done for you. And, in terms of spreading the information out, I want to reiterate something that I've been pushing in our talk show too, which is that one of the best things that people that are already here can do for those who are not here yet is reach out to your friends or family members that are planning to come in, all of them that you can think of, and make sure they know about all this stuff. Share the links to the documents, tell them about the websites. If they don't have a smartphone, just pull it up on your computer and read it to them. Do everything that you can to inform people coming in so we maximize the number of people that know what's going on before they even arrive. Because as I've been saying, who is somebody more likely to believe? With all due respect, Heather, don't take this the wrong way, but people are probably more likely to believe and respond to their friends than a government official. So I really hope people will do that and do everything possible to inform their friends and family so people are ready and know what to expect as soon as they get in here. Now, a different question, which sort of looks at the other side of this. There's been a lot of concern, obviously, on the part of people in town that measures are in place for the benefit of the year-round residents to deal with this influx. And a question you got kind of in that vein is, what's being done to ensure that there are places for incoming workers to self-isolate when they arrive in Cordova? Who's reaching out to these people to schedule them to come up so we don't get overrun?
So to answer that question, currently the seafood processors are preparing plans to quarantine arriving workers for 14 days with the season-long isolation restrictions. The state of Alaska also requires them to turn in plans with them as well. The city of Cordova will accept a state-approved plan, but will also require the processor to sign an agreement to abide by in Cordova. The city of Cordova also has a mutual aid agreement. It's a one-page document available online, and those will be filled out by everyone in the fishing fleet. And part of having them fill out this form is kind of that physical recognition that, we know that you're here. We support you being here, but we also want you to know what our expectations are. And we want to know that if there is an issue with yourself or your crew, that you're instantly going to report that through the proper channels. And currently, those are kind of the two things that we have set in place to sort of monitor the influx, give us an idea on how many numbers are coming in and how everybody plans on attending to what the COVID-19 situation could look like at a processor and or the harbor. And in that way, we're sort of mitigating a lot of the risks that could be involved there. And then the Cordova Incident Management Team is working with the seafood industry formally, at least once weekly at that local level. And at the state level to keep up with plans and processes that other folks are putting in place. Additionally, I mentioned the Fisheries Task Force, and that's kind of something that's going to help us with that traffic at the harbor and how they interact within the community. So those are both really positive measures.
Yeah. So this emphasis on plans, again, and CDFU put out a message on this too, which is not your message necessarily. They may be wording it a little differently, but essentially they're warning everybody in no uncertain terms that if you intend to work in the fishery, if you want to be considered an essential worker in an essential industry, you have to have your paperwork done and your plan on file and show that you understand what's expected and what the standards are. And if not, again, the state has got some very hefty penalties for not following these instructions. So you really hope that people aren't going to try to just say, oh, this isn't a big deal, I'm not going to pay attention. And you also, again, hope that people who have friends and family coming in to participate will reach out and share this information with people that are coming. One more, I think, for this session, and then we should be pretty good. And this is another one that seems to be difficult sometimes for folks to understand, and that's the ability to use the great outdoors. You guys were sent a question that says, can someone who is self-isolating or self-quarantining walk their dog and go for hikes? And or can they go to the grocery store? So what's the response there?
So they absolutely can be outdoor. What we're expecting when we say that you're going to self-quarantine is that you are going to have your place of residence or your domicile, that you're going to stay within those confines for the 14 days, that you are going to have someone deliver your mail, potentially, your groceries if necessary. And that's why the stores have set up that call-in and delivery service. We're expecting that you're going to reach out to your friends and family to have them help you deliver goods during that time. But you absolutely can go outdoors. We just want you to maintain that at least 6-foot distance from any other community member during that time. Because when a person coughs or sneezes, it can go, at an estimated up to 6 feet. And so that's what we're considering is our safe distance, and we don't want anyone, if you do become ill, to have contracted that because they've made contact with you. So if you want to go on a hike, if you want to go on a walk, if you want to walk your dog, if you would like to go kayaking, things of that nature are all fine as long as you're keeping that social distance. And if you're using any shared materials, we just ask that you sanitize those and wipe them down because the virus can be contracted from surfaces, even though that is potentially not the main form of passing the virus.
Right. Airborne is the primary concern.
Yeah. And we want you to be mindful, if you're out and you're not wearing gloves and you're not wearing a mask, we want you to cover your cough. We want you to be mindful of the things that you're touching that someone else in the community may touch, just because of the time that it can survive on surfaces. But we absolutely do want you to be able to open your windows, go out, take a small walk, get some fresh air. The idea is not to pen everybody up, but kind of just to offer that separation and that safe distance.
Sure. And then people that do have symptoms that are actually self-isolating, there is a desire that those people not be in public spaces, grocery stores, post office, that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're quarantining and or if you're in self-isolation, you shouldn't be going into the grocery store anyways. And that's kind of why we have the call-in delivery option set up. But, if you're self-isolating because you're actually having symptoms, if you are on your own, we just want you to be cautious of your space and that you're, kind of wiping things down for yourself so that you don't keep those germs, circulating in your environment if you're well enough to do so. And if you're in a household that has other members, we ask that you find a separate room to stay in during that time so that the spread of those germs is as minimal as possible. Because if you are actively infected, then obviously, you're contagious to everyone in your space. So limiting, the use of bathroom spaces and personal private materials is a very big one to think about and
Sure.
cover.
Not only because of the risk of making other people in your household sick, but because everyone in the household has to behave as if they have it, whether they feel like it or not, if somebody in the household is symptomatic. Well, it's a lot to go over, Heather, and I thank you and the other members of the team who got called away to the next meeting in a row. Anything else especially stand out, important to you before we wrap up? Sort of any burning questions that we didn't cover that really seem to be on a lot of people's minds?
I just think it's really important that when people have questions that we're reaching out through the right avenues to get answers. And I think as a community, it's really important that we exercise a lot of kindness right now. I know there's a lot of fear about people coming in from outside the community, but I would also like everybody to consider, what it's like to be outside the community and know that you have to travel here, because that does incur some type of risk in itself. And I think just as a people in general throughout the United States, we're all a little vulnerable right now. So any amount of extra kindness is good during this time.
Good. It's a very good thought to end on, and I appreciate it. All right, that will conclude our very first Frequently Asked Question program, which is intended to be a supplement to the city's weekly briefing. If you want to see that briefing, it is on the city's, I would assume it's been archived or will be soon on the city's YouTube channel. We also archive those on ours, youtube.com/CordovaTV. As soon as Robbie can get that up there for you, he will. And then this program you're hearing on the radio is intended to supplement that. It gives us an opportunity to sit down with key members of the incident management team and take on those questions one by one. We met with Mayor Copeland, also with Heather Brannon, the emergency management coordinator, and Dr. Hannah Sanders, who is the medical advisor to the incident management team. Now, again, if you're hearing this on the air and ended up starting in the middle, that's okay, because very soon it will, if it's not already, very soon it will go on to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/CordovaTV. Again, youtube.com/CordovaTV. Thank you for listening. We'll be doing another one of these next week. We'll be having our daily briefings with Mayor Copeland that run 3 times a day on KLAM and KCED. And, of course, our town meeting talk show. Any of these programs that we do on the radio will be archived on the YouTube channel. You can hear them anytime you like. Thank you again for listening. Everybody have a great weekend.